Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Welcome to video class. Now, today we are going to discuss a nitrogen cycle. This is the last question of this chapter. Now, what is nitrogen cycle? As we know, nitrogen is required by both plants and animals for their growth and development. It is required for both plants and animals, plants as well as animals, because the growth and development of plant and animal depends on the nitrogen. So as far as the percentage of nitrogen is concerned, then in atmosphere the percentage of nitrogen is 78%, and this percentage should be maintained. So for that, nitrogen cycle takes place. As we know, nitrogen is an essential element and component of proteins, and as we also know that protein are the building blocks of our body, even building blocks of plants and animals. Nitrogen is also present in chlorophyll. This is nitrogen is present in chlorophyll, nucleic acids, and vitamins. And all these are very important components for the development of living organisms. So that's why we say nitrogen is important for both plant as well as animals. Now, as far as the nitrogen cycle is concerned, what do you mean by the nitrogen cycle? The circulation of nitrogen. So we can say the circulation of nitrogen element through living things. Living things means plants and animals. And non-living environment, which includes soil, water, air, is called nitrogen cycle in nature. So in short, we can see the circulation of nitrogen element through living things and non-living environment is called a nitrogen cycle. And the main steps involved in nitrogen cycle is, as far as the main step is concerned, number first is atmospheric nitrogen. Here we can see on the flow chart, this is the atmospheric nitrogen. We say atmospheric nitrogen, which includes nitrogen gas. It's fixed by rhizobium bacteria present in the soil and in the root nodules of leguminous plant. As we know, bacteria that fixes the atmospheric nitrogen is present in the root nodules of the leguminous plant. Also, blue-green algae also participates in this, and also lightning also fix the atmospheric nitrogen, but it's very rare from the atmosphere, and it gets converted into nitrogenous compounds of nitrogen which go into the soil. And when we say the compounds of the nitrogen, that means it includes nitrites and nitrates. These were the nitrogenous compounds. And the second step is the plant take compounds of nitrogen when it gets converted into nitrite and nitrate. Plants take compounds of nitrogen from the soil for their growth. The plants absorb the nitrogenous compounds from the soil through roots. The plant converts the compounds of nitrogen into plant proteins. That's why we say here this is a plant protein. When it is absorbed and it is converted into plant protein by the plants and other organic compounds which make up the body of plants. Now the third step is the plants are eaten up by animals. As we know, animals convert plant proteins into animal proteins and the other organic compounds which make up their body. Some animals also eat other animals to obtain nitrogenous compounds. Thus, animals obtain nitrogen compound by eating plants as well as other animals. So, when the plants and animals die, the complex nitrogen compound like proteins present in their dead bodies are decomposed and converted into simple compounds of nitrogen. That's called, when here we can say, when they die, their body gets decomposed, and it is decomposed with denitrifying bacteria, and they decompose it in the compounds of nitrogen. So all the simple compounds of nitrogen formed in the way go into the soil, or we can say in this way, the soil from the soil, these nitrogen compounds are again absorbed by the new plants for their growth, and this part of nitrogen cycle is repeated endlessly. Or we can say the wastes of the animals. As we know, animals excretion, for example urine, are also converted into simple compounds of nitrogen, or we can say all the simple compounds of nitrogen formed in this way go into the soil. So the next step is, some of the compounds of nitrogen formed from the decay of dead plants and animals are decomposed by denitrifying bacteria. Here I have written that, present in the soil to form nitrogen gas. And the nitrogen gas goes back into the atmosphere from where it initially came. This process is the reverse of fixation of nitrogen. In this way, the nitrogen gas which was removed from the atmosphere during fixation is put back into the atmosphere. In this way, the cycle turns, or we can say come back. In this way, the atmospheric nitrogen is maintained or balanced in the nature. And when it goes back into the atmosphere again, this nitrogen is used again during nitrogen fixation, and the nitrogen cycle is repeated in nature again and again. As a result of nitrogen cycle in nature, the percentage of nitrogen gas in the atmosphere remains constant. So in this way, nitrogen cycle takes place. And this was all about the nitrogen cycle, and it's better to understand it from the flow chart. When we will observe the flow chart, we can easily understood what actually the nitrogen cycle is and what happens in the nitrogen cycle. I have make a flow chart over here. You can see atmospheric nitrogen is fixed by rhizobium bacteria that's present in the root nodules of the leguminous plant, and also it's fixed by the blue green algae. Sometimes it is fixed by the lightning, and after that it gets converted into nitrates and nitrites, which were the compounds of nitrogen in the soil. And when the compounds of nitrogen gets absorbed into the soil, and where it is absorbed by the plants make the plant proteins from the nitrogen, and plants are eaten by animals make the animal proteins. On the other hand, animals uh, excrete the nitrogenous waste, which again gets uh, uh, absorbed in the soil. Or in other words, we can say, on the other side, we can say the nitrates and nitrites, which were the compounds of the nitrogen in the soil, were also being decomposed by the denitrifying bacteria. They decompose compounds of nitrogen, and when it gets decomposed, it goes back into the atmosphere in the form of nitrogen gas. In this way, the cycle remains constant. So this was all about the nitrogen cycle. With this, we have finished this first chapter of a microorganism for friend and foe, which was the first chapter of unit 1. So, and next chapter, in next lecture, we will start the new chapter. Fi aman Allah.